Hello and welcome to Reimagining Cyber. My name is Rob Borrego, Chief Security Strategist with OpenText. Cybersecurity is at a turning point. For years, the industry has focused on prevention, building stronger walls, blocking more attacks, keeping adversaries out. Then came the shift to detection and response, assuming breaches would happen and racing to contain them in real time. But today, that's no longer enough. As cloud environments expand and AI accelerates attacker capabilities, breaches are not just more likely, they're moving faster and spreading further. The question is no longer if you get breached or even when you detect it, but how far it goes. Today on Reimagining Cyber, I'm joined by Doug Merritt, CEO of Aviatrix and former CEO of Splunk. Doug has been at the center of cybersecurity's evolution, and he's making the case for a new era, one focused on containment. In this conversation, we're going to unpack why traditional approaches are falling short, how cloud has changed the game, and why limiting blast radius must be one of the most important new metrics moving forward. Hey, Doug, listen, it's a pleasure having you on today. Really excited to talk about this topic that I know is near and dear to your heart. We've had some good conversations offline getting into it, but the top level, it's really kind of this shift around prevention in the cyber world to really containment and rethinking the approach overall. Maybe you can start us off with just kind of explaining, what is that problem that we're dealing with at this point in time?
Yep, perfect. Great intro. So when I think about cybersecurity, prevention was the first wave. I'd call that era one. And that really started when we plugged the internet into data centers. The internet is unmanaged. Everyone that has access to the internet, which is billions and billions of people, now has a paved road to your laptop or your data center. So that really got the cyber industry going, and it was all about prevention. You had a single data center or multiple data centers, but they had walls and edges, and you had to very defined ingress and egress, enter and exit points for the internet. And that birthed the whole firewalling and corollary movement that Checkpoint started, and then Fortinet improved on, and Palo improved on, and very important. But all the metrics were, did you block stuff? Like how much of a deflector shield did you create? Like the bad guys aren't able to get in. And then the landscape got really complex. We introduced cloud and a bunch of other mechanisms. And what we were evangelizing at Splunk is, prevention doesn't go away. Still an important thing to do, but you better shift a lot of your resources to detect and remediate. Like you got to assume the bad guys are in. And so mean time to detect and mean time to remediate, MTTD and MTTDR became the key metrics and still are today. And it was, can you move faster? Can you see bad things and move faster than the attacker so you can get in front of them and not make it too detrimental? So I helped champion that. I'd say Splunk was one of the first that really pounded the table, which served Splunk's needs because we were this beautiful data lake that took all the data from all the systems to help you see these signals and get in front of the attackers. But I viewed it as critical for the industry. Well, I think we're entering era 3, which is the containment era, which is all about how far can a successful breach reach within your environment? And how do you keep it localized? How do you keep it so it's not too detrimental?
For sure. And you used a great analogy from my perspective to kind of walk through this. So maybe let's let you take the audience through it, right? So you discussed this analogy of a submarine to explain containment and what you're really looking at. So what does it actually look like inside of an organization? Or so think about it as our listeners, operators working in their environments are listening to hear what this approach is. How would they kind of go about that? So maybe that submarine analogy is a good way to do that.
Sure, absolutely. So we'll talk about AI and cloud later. Like there's a bunch of third elemental external events that are really driving this. And I'd say what's old is new again, because containment's not a new philosophy, right? But because of the environment, it actually feels like a new environment, a new philosophy. So there's, for any critical system, there's 80 plus years of engineering, both math and practicality, that helps make sure that you don't have catastrophic events in those critical systems. Think about nuclear reactors, think about airplanes, think about spacecraft, think about submarines, right? You're at depth under the ocean. If you have a significant leak in the submarine and it spreads, then it implodes and everyone dies. That's catastrophic. So how do you not have it be a catastrophic? Assuming things will go wrong, like the whole orientation around critical systems and survivability is you got to assume failure, and then you've got to build the right systems architecture so that failure is not catastrophic. So why are subs built with a whole series of breach locks? Because if you assume, hey, I may get a leak for multiple different reasons, if I can contain that leak, it's not a great event. Like I eventually got to get up to the surface. I'm going to have to deal with what happened, but I can get to the surface and everyone survives. So that really is the foundation of this containment approach is if you're assuming breach as a constant, and we'll talk about why that is likely the case, then the real issue becomes how detrimental is that breach? And that goes back to blast radius and the score around blast radius. How rapid does that hole become and how far can that water go? And if you can contain it, the sub probably survives and it doesn't implode.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's, I think I told you this before, like one of the main reasons that we launched the podcast time ago was around a driving factor around cyber resilience. And one of the key goals of cyber resiliency is minimize impact. And this is a great aspect of thinking about an approach to minimize impact. One of the questions I wanted to kind of maybe offer a little bit with you on is, how would you characterize this different from kind of what we've seen in the past around network segmentation? Is it similar? Is it the same? Is it a new way of approaching it? Just maybe you can kind of frame that up if you don't mind.
Super similar concepts. Like again, like why is a concept reborn? Now you go back to Wiz and all the success of Wiz. Vulnerability scanning, age old. Like that's not a new concept. Wiz did it in a different way for an environment that had a whole different set of problems. In this case, cloud for Wiz, right? And so, yeah, you never saw Guardicore get to a $32 billion valuation. You've been doing that work for quite a while.
Great point.
And so the advocacy that we have, like it goes back to what is cloud and how is cloud architected and what is AI and what is AI doing? But at the core, it is making sure that you govern the communication channels, which comes back to two tools, network segmentation and the actual containment capability. Which you had back in your data centers. You had a multiple set of networks, you had segments between the networks, and you had literal firewalling, IDS, IPS, private VPNing. Like there are many different things that you had in that data center so that you could contain something if it went wrong. What we're trying to educate people on is the way that cloud is architected for 90+% of the organizations using cloud. All those principles went out the window, and we'll get to that in the. We'll get to that.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about AI, because I mean, I don't have an episode that comes out for the past year and a half that doesn't discuss something about AI. And when you and I chatted about AI specifically around this topic, again, you had your specific points, and I think the key word I would say is either amplification or acceleration.
Yes.
Right? So think about it from your point of view. And I hate to ask you the question this way, but it's just simple. Like, what keeps you up at night relative to AI's impact right now in the cyber world?
Yeah, and this topic, the combination of AI, industrialization of the attacker supply chain, and non-containment in cloud literally has me up at night. Like I got a tough time sleeping. So you're not being just theoretical or facetious on that question. So what is going on with AI? Like people are over-rotated on Mythos. Mythos is just the latest point in time on a progression that we've been very consistently exploring for years now. Before ChatGPT, the paper was out 10 plus years ago, and there were transformers before ChatGPT. So we've been on this wonderful curve of accelerating capability. And Mythos is just a great example of the coding skills. Like these are large language models, and the coding efficacy is going through the roof. There's two aspects of coding. There's the benign aspects and the malignant aspects, and it's very hard to put guardrails around those. But what I believe AI is doing is two things simultaneously. It is radically changing, it's democratizing attack capability. Before, to do very sophisticated attacks, you had to be an expert. And there are only so many nefarious folks living in areas where they didn't feel like if they got caught, they would go to prison for 50 years, that had the skills necessary to mount these very sophisticated attacks. That now is landing in everybody's hands going forward.
Right.
And it's not just Mythos. Like Anthropic, thank you for holding that off and making sure that it doesn't enter right away. There's good reasons for them to do that outside of just what's happening in the ecosystem around them. But their open source arena is galloping very closely behind these private foundational models. OpenAI has their own capabilities. So it's just the inherent property of what AI and LLMs are doing. So it's democratizing skills and it's changing the economics. You're really about it by compute and tokens to do these attacks,
Right.
and those cheapens it dramatically. And then the sophisticated attackers are organizing in different ways. And we saw that with the Team PCP series of breaches about a month ago. They're cooperating. There's people that insert malware. There's people that harvest credentials. There's people that invoke ransomware. There's people that distribute that capability. So they're way more lethal because of the way that they work. And the third piece that we'll talk about is, and where are they going to go? And where they're going to go is cloud. And where they have gone is cloud. When for the 47 significant breaches since January 1 that reported, and we all know, like that's a vast minority of the actual exfils and breaches that are occurring, that the 45 of the 47 were directly in cloud. And they were directly going after ephemeral workloads. And we'll talk about why that's the case.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you called it out right now with the bad guys, the hackers. I mean, it's truly an economy, right? So as you said, they kind of go to market with each of the different capabilities and specialties that they have. And AI continues to amplify that. And they have their own LLMs that are very much competitive on the other side of the coin. So yeah, I mean, this acceleration is, it's obviously real, but again, it's getting ahead of this as much as possible on our side of, fighting the good fight, if you will.
Yeah.
Changing the kind of playbook, right? Shifting this perspective of what we've done for so long. You alluded to a little bit about from vulnerability management and how it's been around for so long. And then here comes Wiz and says, oh, I'm applying similar yet new capabilities, and I'm targeting it to where the problems really are now, which is in the cloud environment. Well, as we have these conversations, in organizations, and we're talking to the CISO and saying, hey, you just kind of can't go patch everything per se, but like, just what is the approach? Right? What are you thinking about? How are you applying that, now as the modern CISO in this new world?
So my concern about Wiz has done so much good, but the bad part that Wiz continues to double down on, that amazing folks, 60 plus authors that are luminaries in the CISO community double down on again with the SANS Mythos report that they put out a couple weeks ago. Is everybody is over rotated. It's just any business is you've got to make resource allocation decisions and metrics decisions and focus decisions. And everybody is now really augured in, like overly consumed with vulnerability discovery and vulnerability remediation. All the way to the White House, like governmental agencies, you got to patch all your vulnerabilities. Like how quickly are you going to patch? And it's not that is a bad thing to do. And we do it here at Aviatrix. We're constantly scanning our code and we're determining which ones are actually exploitable and which ones aren't. And the ones that are exploitable, we're shutting them down right away. So it's a necessary condition. It's just not the condition that is going to generate success. If you understand that we're democratizing sophisticated skills, we're cheapening the equation to do that. They're industrialized supply chain for the people that are going to be the most difficult and nefarious for you to deal with. And you're wide open on containment. You can patch all day. The biggest problem with that orientation is detection is just a search activity that's getting cheaper and cheaper. The cost per search, as we've seen, and the cost per token is plummeting. Patching is an organizational capability. So there is a ceiling to patching. There is almost an infinite to up into the right curve with detection, and you're just not going to resolve those two. And then there's so many systems that can't be patched. Like for all the controllers that sit in manufacturing that have been out there for 15 years, what are you going to do? Like it's just not. Again, it's important, and it's an important activity to do. It is not the thing that is going to prevent catastrophic breaches for any CISO that's in the cloud. I can promise you that. Any CISO that's in the cloud that hasn't taken a containment approach.
Yeah, for sure. You bring up a great point too on the patching side of it. I think people just don't really think about the big picture. And I call back a couple different episodes we had from speaking to NASA, from speaking to Idaho National Labs on operational technology. It is not an easy thing that you're just going to go patch those types of systems, right? And in most cases, you're not, right? So it's that trade-off, right? The risk kind of measurement and metrics that are around the decisions to make. But too many people kind of just press, well, just why why aren't you patching? Well, there's good reason in certain situations why you just kind of can't.
There's a ton of studies, like 10 to 15% of the energy is determining where the vulnerability is. 85% of the energy is like, now what do I do? Like, how do I triage this? And what is the actual fix going to look like? And how do I not introduce a whole series of new vulnerabilities with the fix?
The whole
What's the downstream effect of all the different systems this thing is going to impact? And how do I test that effectively? And when do I stage it? Like, when do I have an open window to do that? Not. And because the number one thing, like, why is security always challenged? Because security is friction. And every CEO and board is saying, go as fast as you can. That's only gotten more intense with the world of AI. And they don't want the actual friction. And every single time you touch a system, it is a risk. And what you can't have is you can't have your critical systems go down. So but you've got to have enough security so that they don't go down wholesale with a significant ransomware attack that's going to get you to respond effectively. So it's just trade-offs. Like business life is trade-offs. Business is trade-offs. Everything is trade-offs. There's risks, everything. You've got to allocate your resources appropriately to try and have a reasonable risk profile across your estate.
Yeah. And it goes back to the kind of the key theme we talked about earlier, which is do the best you can to assess the risk and minimize the impact when these things happen at the end of the day. Let's go on to the topic of cloud. We've been touching upon it, of course, as we're kind of talking through this, but many organizations had this in their mind that, hey, as I shift to the cloud, I'm kind of getting security baked in. Well, not so much, my friends, right? It's still you that owns and are responsible and accountable for how you're securing and protecting your environment. But I mean, from your perspective, how do we get to this point in time where, one misconfiguration, as we've seen, causes major issues for organizations? And kind of at the end of the day, like, who's responsible for that type of gap?
So I think two things simultaneously happened with the cloud that got us to this very, very troublesome position. One is what you started with, the illusion that I'm sitting inside Amazon, Microsoft, or Google, and those guys are the best security teams in the world, therefore I must be safe. It's what they call the shared responsibility model. And you are right on they've got the best security teams. And the way they've built their data centers and offerings is way beyond what almost anyone in the world can do. Right? It's hard to imagine more secure environments for their data centers. The shared responsibility model is every single workload that you provision from us, or that you bring in, or that you invoke from third parties is 100% your responsibility, which I understand why they did that, because they cannot control the actual configurations and the network segmentation and the inspection and like that. They do their best. They've got their well-architected frameworks and a bunch of other things to try and make it more secure. But I think that misconception is brutal. But then right next to it is, how do clouds grow so quickly? Like, why did cloud even happen? I was there at the very beginning in 05, 06, 07, 08 with AWS when I was head of products and technology at SAP, and we're hosting workloads in early, just at S3, EC2 instances of AWS. They were developer focused. How do you get developers on board? What do developers need? They need friction. Like, why am I going to the cloud? Because it takes me 2 weeks to get a workload provision in my data center. I've got to go through all these different checks. They've got to provision the infrastructure. Security's got to actually evaluate it. I got to open up tickets, and eventually 2 or 3 weeks later, I'll get a workload. And I don't have 2 weeks. I don't have 3 weeks. I've got to ship. And so the clouds are insecure by default. The clouds have reduced friction by making sure that every workload that they provision, almost every workload that's in cloud is wide open to the internet and on communication channels as a default, because that's how you prevent friction. And then they assume that the corporate entity is going to begin, as I understand that, they're going to begin to invoke their security controls. But CISOs are not there. Like, who is there? The app development team, the SRE team is there. And unless you can commandeer all those guys to take a security first approach, and they're trying to go fast also, you don't get it. So we've got these estates for, I bet 90+% of organizations in cloud that have basically flat networks with basically no inspection, very little inspection between the workloads, and very little inspection, very little knowledge of which ones of these workloads have direct egress capability to the internet and what are they egress into, which is that is the third toxic combination. You've got AI democratizing and cheapening. You've got the attackers beginning to become in a supply chain. You've got flat, wide open networks brutally expose the internet. Like, that is a toxic combination. Like, that is why I can't sleep at night.
Making it easier. Exactly. Yep. So let's wrap it up with this, right? Which is, okay, now we're the CISO in an organization talking to the board, talking to the executive leadership team. And, if you kind of start with a statement of, hey, we will be breached, it becomes a little bit of a hard sell, right? It almost sounds like they're giving up. And they're not, but you're just setting expectation that, listen, we're going to do all these things. We're going to do the best we can to protect, right, and minimize impact, as we talked about before. But how do you reframe containment, right, as a strength and not admission of failure? Like, how do you tie that, containment approach that you've been discussing to be really a key area of focus for them as part of their maturation of their program to help with breaches that we just know, again, are going to happen no matter what you do?
Yeah. So where I think the industry has gravitated into very quickly is you have to assume infinite 0 days with things like Ethos, and right now, CrowdStrike put a report months ago that I think 82 or 84% of all breaches wrote valid credentials. So when you go to the reality that you're not going to see a lot because there's likely to be valid credentials operating, which makes the detect and remediate issue much harder. And you've got infinite 0 days, you're going to be breached. Like, breach is going to approach one for many different organizations and many different areas of the state. So then the question is, so what do we do? Like, we can't give up. We still have got our job. The way I do it is you introduce a new metric. You've got the series of prevention metrics from the prevention era. And there's a whole host of those. You've got MTTR, and MTTD as the key metrics for the second era. Blast radius is the third, is the additional metric that we need to introduce at the board level. It's like if you're reading the papers, you understand what's going on in the cyber industry, we're all, have to agree that our breach likelihood is significantly higher and very difficult for us to authoritatively say we're going to be able to control. So our remediative approach is we're going to have a blast radius score and have confidence that if something happens, it's only going to travel so far. It's only going to affect these different areas of the system. And then you can also wrap that with a bunch of different detection and response capability. And you can take different approaches for critical workloads versus less critical workloads. But without a new metric for executives and the White House and CISA and other agencies to gravitate toward, I think we're all going to be swimming uphill on this one.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree. And I love that aspect of introducing that new metric. I think it's a great point, and it does align strongly to obviously what you're talking about with containment. So Doug, listen, truly a pleasure. Love to talk to you again in the future for sure. Great having you kind of change the way people are thinking. This is what this is all about in our podcast. It's like, hey, bring a different approach to the table. Let's discuss this thing. Let's figure it out. And then let people, come back with what they're seeing and how they're learning from these capabilities. So thank you so much once again.
I really appreciate having me on, Rob, and I'm super passionate about this. So anyone that's interested, we've got math to prove these things, by the way. So there's a lot of grounded first principle thinking that have gone into this position.
Excellent. Great to hear it. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.